because back in 1637, the Dutch weren't so much stopping to smell the flowers, they were preparing to lose their shirts on them. As far as boom, bubbles and busts go, the tulip craze in Holland between 1593 and 1637 was pretty spectacular. It may come as a surprise to some people to realise that the humble tulip is not a native flower of Holland. It was introduced in 1593 from Constantinople, and in a world that had very little else to occupy itself, that humble flower was a hit from day one, and prices rose year on year, until ordinary people began to think, this is a one-way bet. Now, does this sound familiar? And so more and more people joined the party, and prices rose and rose. Physical bulbs were in short supply, and so some enterprising soul dreamed up the world's first futures contract, called a windhandel, a wind trade. Who said the Dutch didn't have a sense of humour? In the final year of trading, prices rose over 1,000%. What triggered the collapse is somewhat in doubt as stories vary, but the results weren't. Within a matter of weeks, prices had dropped to a fraction of their former selves. The government was powerless to stem the financial carnage that ensued. People up and down the land were left destitute, and anybody with anything left, well, they fled in fear of reprisal. But you know, every cloud has a silver lining for someone. And Holland's woes were most certainly a silver lining for the fledgling capital of London, as enterprises and companies fled Holland to London. So you would think, perhaps, that us Brits had learnt a lesson or two from the Dutch. But oh no, we had to teach ourselves our own lesson. Because in 1720, a bubble the size of a balloon was about to pop. A bubble called the South Sea Trading Company. And this urbanely named firm had been set up at the bequest of the British government and given a monopoly position to trade with South America and the South Sea Islands. You have to understand that back then, everybody thought that South America was just dripping with gold and silver and precious jewels. You could just scoop up fortunes from anybody who was enterprising enough to be able to get there and back. The South Sea Trading Company promptly gave the British government £5 million on the promise of the wealth to come, and in thanks of the monopoly position, a vast sum. Now, there was only one little fly in the ointment. A Spanish fly. Because it was the Spanish who controlled the waters of South America and the South Sea Islands. And as the Spanish were apt to just be a little grumpy with us Brits back then, they were having none of it. Did this faze the directors of the South Sea Company? Not one jot. Because numbering in their board was 119 peers of the realm and 437 MPs. So they promptly got together and drafted a communique that said all was well with the Spanish court, and promptly began to sell their shares in the coffee shops and trading houses of the day. Now, to say interest was brisk would be an understatement. The dealings between the South Sea Trading Company and the British government were Machiavellian in their twists and turns, leading to eventually the company underwriting the entire national debt. Some £30 million of national debt on the promise of the wealth to come. Now, this must sound familiar by this stage. every house in the land was involved. You simply had to have South Sea Company stock. It couldn't fail. The government was involved, and they couldn't be wrong now, could they? Between January and August of 1720, the share price rose 680%. And then in September, disaster struck, as two banks dumped their stocks because they hadn't received any dividends. There were no dividends to receive. Chaos ensued. By the end of September, the nation was in a shambles. Again, the government crumbled. And justice was meted out in the sort of way we can only dream of being meted out to modern day bankers today. They were hunted down. They were imprisoned. Their possessions forfeit to the state. In many cases, the crown got there first. The Postmaster General took poison to avoid being lynched by the mob. His son, the Secretary of State, narrowly avoided the same fate by contracting smallpox and dying. Oh, for those halcyon days of yore. In the 290 years that's spanned in between, we have seen countless cycles of rise and fall, fear and greed, boom, bubble and bust, from gold mines to real estate, from the roaring 20s to the Dust Bowl economy of the 1930s. We've seen it all. And ladies and gentlemen, we still live in an age of boom, bubble and bust. As our chart of the Standard & Poor's stock index over the last 10 years can show us, we have seen two of the largest stock market crashes in history in just the last 10 years. What this means for normal people is that they have become poorer and not richer over this period of time, as their pensions struggle to cope with the level of volatility, as taxation bites into their wage packets, as the price of their real estate has fallen below what they owe on it. Now, to this litany of woe, I only have one thing to say. Good. Good. Because at First Financial Direct Group, we know, with a focused and disciplined approach, these cycles of fear and greed, rise and fall, boom, bubble and bust, give us opportunity. Opportunity to take action. Action such as removing our clients in 2007 from the markets and preserving their wealth so that we could come back in 2009 and increase that. Action such as advising our clients to lock in some of the lowest interest rates we've seen in generations, so that they could buy property in cities like Frankfurt and Munich and receive rental yields between 7 and 12% per annum, and see those same bricks and mortar price rise, not fall, rise between 40 and 100% in the last 3 years. Action such as buying agricultural commodities, as the wheat fields of Russia burned over this summer. And we've seen wheat prices up 47% this year, and corn's up a massive 61%. So if anybody likes their Frosties, I'm afraid it's going to cost you a little bit more. But, you know, no matter how well we're prepared to plan the 4 W's, no matter how much information and opinion we have at our fingertips, it really is action that speaks loudest. So you might be wondering, what sort of action are we taking at First Financial Direct Group and are prepared to take, given recent history?